We continue the conversation on the talking point 7 after 10 o'clock. Welcome to the second hour of the show. And of course, coming up in this hour, we're going to be focusing on our neighboring Mozambique, getting to grips with what has been happening there, especially with the post-election violence. The death toll now sitting at around 30. Those are the number of people that have been killed in the post-election violence. This is in the last 3 weeks, and we've seen multiple protests. The Lebombo border post was shut down last week. I see this morning that it has reopened for some cargo to go through. So we'll take a look at that particular issue in the next hour. Let me take your WhatsApp voice notes from the open line.
Good morning, Cathy and the team. This is Miranda. I'm wondering where the government is going to get the money to give grants to millions and millions of people, and where the government is going to source all this money, because the workforce is diminishing every day. Those who are working are taxed to death. So where are all this money going to come from? The best thing that can happen is that the government go and lobby overseas investors to come and invest here, build factories and everything else, so that people can be employed, and lessen this burden of government having to hand out money to everybody who's anyone. I really don't know how this thing is going to work, because they keep on pushing for basic income grants, social of relief, distress grant. There is all these SASA recipients. So where are all this money going to come? South Africa has become a nanny state. Even the first world country cannot withstand all this giving of money.
Cathy, good morning. Flores here from the Western Cape. With regards to the Spaza shop, first and foremost, government should have acted a long time ago, but however, yes, they are starting now, and we should not clap hands for their giving attention to this now, because it's part of their job. However, there is regulations, there is acts already that governs Spaza shops. Why must there be new legislation? And however, we also need to do then checks on these inspectors who's going to do these inspections, that they don't use this an opportunity to take bribes. And also these landowners that allows these Spaza shops to pop up, they should also be taken to task. Have a good job, bye-bye.
Princess Cathy, good morning to you, good morning to your team. Great show always. It's Uncle JJ, the truck driver in Gauteng. You see this new MKSG, Shibambo, he mustn't excited with the post. He must come and explain to us what happened to the VBS scandals. Before he blames media, that media, they are saying, what about the president is swimmer and what. No. Shabambu, he must come and explain what happened to VBS saga scandal. Looted. And now he say media is talking wrong. It's not wrong, man.
Morning, Cathy. Morning, Cathy. I'm not sure if I heard Banyaza Lesufi correctly. He said 23 kids died because of this food poison. 23 kids. 23 kids, and it's now when the government wakes up to say we've got a problem in these tech shops. What is the Minister of Small Business and Enterprise doing? Like, what is her job? Because she should be making sure that there are strict regulations for these small tech shops. I mean, like, what's going on? Like, are we really on autopilot? Yo! We are too passive, man.
All right, those are your WhatsApp voice notes. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, lots of you also weighing in on the issue of the minimum wage following Mike's comments. We'll bring you some of those voice notes as the show continues. Well, last week saw an escalation of post-election violence in Mozambique. It led to the closing of the Libomba border post between South Africa and that country. Opposition parties have denounced last month's election results. That result saw Frelimo hanging on to power. SADC, on the other hand, which has been accused of not acting quick enough, also had to step in. It called for an extraordinary summit. Advocacy group Human Rights Watch has also reported that government has interfered with internet access and social media as the military is cracking down on protesters. Al Jazeera this morning putting the number of those killed in the aftermath of that violence at 30. Or at least that's, I see here that they're also quoting Human Rights Watch when it comes to that figure. Well, let me invite onto the show our guests that are going to help us unpack what exactly is happening there. Nixon Katembo, executive producer at Channel Africa's Kiswahili desk. He was also in Mozambique covering the elections. So you've been doing election runs in the SADC region, Nixon. Good morning.
I'm just carrying my duty to the nation and the continent.
Look at you, noble gentleman. Dr. Mabatu Mungai is a data analyst in Good Governance Insights and Analytics program at Good Governance Africa. Dr. Mungai, good morning.
Morning, Cathy. Thanks for having me.
And Alan Ngari is Africa Advocacy Director at Human Rights Watch. Alan, good morning. Good morning, Alan. All right, we're going to see if we're able to connect with Alan and get him on the line. I understand he's also traveling, so that could be leading to the poor connection to him. Nixon, I'll begin with you. It was about 2.5 weeks ago that we saw reports of killings, very targeted killings, coming out of Mozambique. And at the time, it had to do with whether or not the election result and some of the processes were going to be challenged in court. Many pointed to those killings as a sign that trouble was going to be brewing. But it seems that not much attention was paid to it, especially not from the region. There were no statements, there was no condemnation, there was just silence.
I've said this before, let me go back to where Mozambique come from independence. The only one of the two countries in Africa that took power from the colonial era through the force of arms. And immediately afterwards, there was a civil war between Renamo and Frelimo that ended in 2002 after the negotiation, the settlement that was reached. And I recall that around 2019, there was kind of a truce of reconciliation time to rebuild the nation. So when these political dynamics happen in a context in which several aspects in the social layers have emerged, it becomes difficult even to look at how problems have happened in the first place. Of course, there are issues of corruption, issues of blaming government, but there are also geopolitical issues, regional issues that have to come in over and above the nature of Mozambique itself because of poverty, inequality among those who have and those who have not, particularly those who have access to power, but also natural disasters. Mozambique is one of the countries that have been battered by natural disasters. So there is a lot you can speak about in Mozambique to explain the current situation of what is happening. Unfortunately, when we talk about issues on a continent, we often forget about the context. We often forget about where did it all start to be where we are today, and therefore look at issues holistically before taking a particular aspect of the entire scenario in Mozambique, particularly with the killings. So they have a history to that. And this is where we need to start to think, hang on, what is going on?
Okay, so then bring it home for us.
In a nutshell, Mozambique is a contested area. a contested area in terms of geopolitics, in terms of internal political problem, and in terms of its regional status. Mozambique is the fourth largest country to which South Africa exports to in the world, after China, the European Union, and the United States. It's a market. Mozambique have got resources that are being contested. You have ExxonMobil and Total investing in gas in the Cabo Delgado area. Interestingly, those projects are being guarded by a foreign army. When I was in Mozambique, people were expressing their dissatisfaction. How could their security in a particular region have been outsourced? That is one. Then you look at the political history of Frelimo itself and the ideological stance that Frelimo had taken vis-a-vis in the global geopolitics. So if you want to understand how the political dynamics have happened, then you have to look at all of the issues. Then you go to the opposition. Renamo, which was the main opposition leader, was being funded at the time and supported by the apartheid government and the United States against Frelimo in a fight there. Venancio Montlane, who is now the leading opposition, come from the rank of Renamo before leaving Renamo over internal political misunderstanding. So he has that in him from the opposition aspect. But also Frelimo in itself, their internal division. You'd recall that Armando Guebuza's son was involved in what would be corruption, they say. There has been tussles between the current president and the two former presidents, mainly Joaquim Chissano, but they do not talk about these issues open. So it becomes now difficult when Nyusi endorse a particular candidate while having all these problems, but also the party in itself not looking after the poor, self-enriching, much of what we've seen in many African continents. When the political parties are in power, they forget who they should serve, servant leadership. So these are issues that we need to talk about before even just taking one aspect of what is happening in a country, to understand where did it all start. It's about corruption, it's about geopolitics, about regional politics, about internal politics within Renamo. It's about even internal politics within the opposition itself. But the question, who is funding them? Who is at the heart of pulling the string behind?
So, Matsapo, I'm going to then bring you in so that you can assist us here in terms of just the clarity around what is fueling the current situation in Mozambique. Nixon has talked about all of the multiple interests that are at play, but also the geopolitical landscape for that country. How do you, as researchers, unpack and make sense of what is happening in Mozambique right now?
Yeah. So, like Nixon pointed out, it is, a number of multiple puzzles that are shifting and moving at the same time. And to diagnose it, so to speak, to one specific factor is very limiting. But I'll narrow my analysis by pointing out two fundamental things. I think that number one, from a regional, but more specific, from an African and then more specifically from a regional perspective, we are seeing this trend of what some would characterize as the dying of liberation movements. And I would argue to say that there is a fundamental difference between liberation movements versus a political party. And in the case of Mozambique, like many other African countries, is that you had liberation movements that transitioned into political parties, yet the strategies, the frameworks that characterize these liberation movements. And keep in mind that the main function, core, and purpose of liberation movements is to, number one, attain independence, and more often than not, through armed struggle. I mean, countries such as Tanzania, Botswana are exceptions to this. But in transitioning from a liberation movement into a political party, what we find in Mozambique, and once again, this is not, Mozambique is not only country, but given that the focus is on Mozambique, what we found with Mozambique is that it's a liberation movement that at some point in time left the people behind. It's a liberation movement turned into a political party that excluded and marginalized Mozambicans. And I mean, being in power since independence, in the mid-1970s up until now, at some point in time when citizens feel frustrated, more importantly, when they feel disconnected from the political or from the governing party, this does not happen instantly, but when it does, as we see the case now, when citizens begin to feel as though they've got nothing to lose, then you do have a ticking time bomb on your hand. And the frustrations that Mozambicans are expressing now, yes, it is directly linked to, contesting the election results. But once again, it's a culmination of years of dissatisfaction, years of sluggish economic growth, years of, poor socioeconomic conditions, and so forth. But for this purpose's sake, we say that the frustration and dissatisfaction, one, and also I think it's also important to point out that prior to the October 9 elections, there were frustrations that were voiced out by opposition parties in particular. I would arguably say that SADC, a regional body such as SADC, should have then voiced its opinion, not intervened. And also keeping in mind that intervention is not only through military intervention, but also comes through in the form of statements and being a mitigating body, so to speak. But when those frustrations and concerns were raised prior to the elections, that is when SADC should have also released a statement. When the 2 deaths were reported a day or two after the elections, that is when SADC should have made a statement. And that silence, what it signaled is that SADC is a body for governing parties and no one else. It does not represent itself as a body for citizens, nor does it represent itself a body for opposition parties. And that in and of itself is problematic because it also speaks into dysfunctionality within SADC member states.
Mabatu, thank you for that explanation, at least on your side. Let me also welcome onto the show Alan Ngari, who is Africa Advocacy Director at Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch, of course, has been watching the situation in Mozambique quite closely as well. Alan, your own observations around the Mozambican election and what has led to this conversation now, the post-election violence that we are seeing, how do you unpack the state the country's in currently?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on your show. I would like to start by, just fully associating with the analysis that both Nixon and Mabatu have just shared. And Nixon on the point of the lack of servant leadership on the continent and the root causes that the leaders of today in many African countries are so detached and removed from. Mozambique is no exception. And on Mabatu's point around, liberation movements that as political parties now exclude the voices of the people that they're meant to protect. Really, this is the unfortunate situation that Mozambique finds itself in. And our concern, particularly with the fact that there is a constitution in Mozambique which guarantees certain rights. The Bill of Rights is very strong. It is the grand norm of the country, And the right to protest is one that is enshrined in the Constitution, and not just the Constitution, but also international law that Mozambique has signed onto, whether it's the UN conventions, whether it is the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Mozambique is party to this. And when individuals then stage peaceful protest, as we have seen from the 24th and 25th of October, until to date, these protests continue, and they are met by security forces that they go ultra-vires their powers. They go beyond the mandate that they have, and violently crack down on protesters. This certainly is of great concern to us as Human Rights Watch. We have documented at least 11 killings in the first, since the protest started, 24th, 25th. The numbers have risen. Last week, we went up to 18, and these are really conservative numbers, and not just in Maputo, but in other districts as well, Nampula and other areas as well. And in, the other concern that we have, very much related to the context that the previous speakers have mentioned, is the very slow action, not just of the of Mozambican authorities in terms of complying with the law, but even SADC itself has been very slow to action. When we talk about the disaster that the crisis that the North faces to date in Cabo Delgado, it took so long for SADC to have boots on the ground, and the bilateral relations then between Rwanda and Mozambique that got the Rwandan Defense Forces on the ground has created these tensions among locals and dissatisfaction. And I think Nixon put it well, where there was just a security outsourcing, and yet the country should be able to manage its own natural resources. So these root causes are really the foundation of these rights abuses in the country that we are very concerned about at present.
We're going to continue the conversation looking at the situation in Mozambique in a moment. You heard there our guests on the line. They will, of course, unpack more of their insights. I wonder then what role the various interests in the country are playing when it comes to the responses or lack thereof now that we're facing the situation of protests and this fallout from the election. We'll get them to answer in a moment. It's 10:30. Time for your latest news headlines.
Thank you, Cathy. News headlines at 10:30 on SAFM. I am Ondelambana, and a very good morning. The Cooperative Governance Minister, Velenkosidi Hlabisa, has introduced a new standard draft bylaw for township economies. 2 children aged 10 and 11 years old have drowned in a trench in Tabong, Valcom in the Free State province. The Department of Water and Sanitation says a group of children, among them the deceased, were attempting to swim inside the trench that was full of water as a result of rainfall from the weekend. And leaders of Arab and Muslim states are gathering for an emergency summit in Saudi Arabia to discuss the conflicts in Gaza and Lebanon. A full update follows at the top of the hour.
Taking a look at your markets this morning, the rand currently trading at 17 rand 64 to the dollar, 22 rand 75 to the pound, and 18 rand 86 to the euro. Markets in Asia were mixed at the closing bell. The JC mainly weekend mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe are higher this hour. Gold is trading at $2,669. Platinum $981 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $73.89 a barrel.
If you think you cannot afford a lawyer, think again. Clientele Legal has made professional legal services affordable for you. Whether it's a civil, criminal, or labor-related matter, we have a nationwide panel of attorneys standing by to assist you. SMS SAFM to 32195. That's SAFM to 32195 and we'll call you back. Clientele General is a licensed non-life insurer and an authorized FSP. Standard rates and terms and conditions apply.
Our role must be to seek to build a better world.
SAFM invites you to our annual public lecture delivered by former Minister Dr. Naledi Pandor. The theme for the lecture is 30 years of South African freedom. Reimagining South Africa's democracy, achievements, challenges, and the road ahead in protecting our democratic gains. The lecture will take place on the 21st of November 2024 at the Birchwood Hotel and Conference Center. Secure your seat by emailing us at info@safm.co.za.
Today, I'm part of seeking to build a better South Africa.
SAFM, leading the conversations that move us.
EFC 119 is live this Thursday with a stellar main event featuring interim champion Terrence the Black Panther Balelo and Edson the Trapdoor Spider Machavani vying for the genuine 24-carat flyweight title, whilst the co-main event will usher in a new era. South Africa's Dana Van Wyk and Nigeria's Juliet Chukwu battle it out for the 135-pound golden buckle. EFC 119 from the World Sports Betting Arena. Watch it on SABC Sport Channel on DTT Channel 4 from 7 p.m. Brought to you by SABC Sport.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue the conversation on the Talking Point. We're unpacking the post-election violence in Mozambique and trying to understand what's really fueling the current state of affairs in that country. Nixon Katembu is an executive producer at Channel Africa's Kiswahili desk. He was in Mozambique covering that election as well. Dr. Mabatu Mungai is a data analyst in the Governance Insights and Analytics program at Good Governance Africa, and Ellen Ngari is an Africa Advocacy Director for Human Rights Watch. Mabatu, I want to come to you with this question that I sort of alluded to before we went to the headlines. How much of the interests that are at play in Mozambique are leading to this situation where, even where ordinarily there should be questions asked around the transparency around the polls, accountability around those results, and the credibility of those processes, that we are seeing an overly cautious approach, if it is even a way of describing it? It seems that nobody wants to quite put their necks on the line. But this shouldn't be one of those issues that is seen as that.
Yeah. Good question. And I think it just goes back to that, right? In attempting to answer the question, to say who is silent, why are they silent? In this particular case, from a regional perspective, I mean, even if you just look at the observation missions that were conducted, and I'll start off with SADC first of all, and then touch base on other stakeholders. From a SADC perspective, SADC only sent 53 observers who monitored 288 out of 25,000 polling stations. This represents about 1% compared to the EU, which observed about 729 polling stations. From the get-go, there was already a lackluster approach and it responds from SADC. Why is that the case? If you go back to even who is the current leader of SADC, which is the former leader or president of Zanzibar, Amini Karumi, he was himself had faced similar allegations or accusations of electoral misconduct. That already sets the tone. Within SADC itself, member states are at loggerheads. We heard Botswana when they sent caution and about Zimbabwe's potential electoral interference in Botswana's elections, which were conducted last week, and also sending warning, or not even warning, but stating that accusations that Zimbabwe had interfered in Mozambique's election. If that is already the posture between SADC members, it means that there is, from the onset, limitations to SADC's impact and the seriousness that they would approach in Mozambique's elections before, during, and after the elections. Within Mozambique itself, I mean, if a political party has been in power since independence, relinquishing that power, the probability and the chances of relinquishing that power becomes even more difficult. Botswana, we saw a more smooth transition to power, so I don't want to give the insinuation that all African leaders who have been into power have difficulty in letting it go. But in Mozambique's case, I will go back to, if there's never been consequence management, and even with Frelimo Party, this is not the first time that there's been dissatisfaction with the lack of governance. This is not the first time that there's been consultation about unfair elections. Nothing was previously done about it. So why would something now be done about it? Why weren't things previously done about it? Why were blood have to be shed in order for a statement? The bare minimum at this point in time is a statement, not even an authoritative and assertive position and decision making, but more so just condemning the violence opposed to something being done about it. And it goes back to Nixon's point to say that it's almost like a well-functioning machine. And intervention, I want to also reiterate that it should be identified as the last resort, which means that even within Mozambique, there are dysfunctional institutions and lack of separation of power. And you've got security forces who, on paper, they are meant to be protecting citizens. They are meant to be seen as the defenders of citizens. But when the very same force is acting against you, when you're protesting and it's a peaceful protest, but that peaceful protest is met with violence and is met with great hostility, once again, that already shifts the tone. You are now identifying yourself as my enemy. So that also just speaks into the social fabric within Mozambique and in Africa in general. There is this lack of relationship, lack of trust between state institutions and citizens themselves. And when citizens do not identify institutions that are meant to be identified as their protectors, that are meant to be identified as sources of accountability, when they don't identify them as such, who do they resort to? Where can they, what are the alternatives? And when there are no alternatives, that is when, once again, citizens then increasingly feel as though they have got nothing to lose. And like I mentioned earlier, when a growing amount of citizens feel as though they've got nothing to lose, you've got a ticking time bomb, because you will go at any lengths to be heard. You'll go at any lengths to protect your voice, to protect this democratic process that is meant to be respected and adhered to by the governing parties and every other stakeholder within society.
Ellen, I'm listening to just the different input on Mozambique, and it's making me think about the elections in Zimbabwe and the role of SADC there, right? Where you have an election that SADC itself said, was flawed, processes were not fully followed, but yet you had the legitimization of the election of a president in that country, and it's been business as usual since that election. And it's just making me think about the state of democracy in some of our countries in the region. And it also seems to me that there's a lot of introspection that SADC as a body is going to have to make here.
Absolutely, Cathy. One of the last lines of defense in any country is the judicial organs, and we hope that judicial organs in every country would be able to be independent, would be able to carry out their functions impartially, and really just interpret the law as it is. But in the region, in the Southern Africa region, we are seeing less and less judicial bodies, judiciaries that would then call out the excesses of the executive particularly. But this is not only in the Southern Africa region, it is continent-wide. And this is the unfortunate situation again that we find ourselves in with Mozambique. And not too long ago, Zimbabwe, you'll recall that just ahead of the SADC summit in August, there was some crackdown on civil society, human rights defenders in Zimbabwe, and the executive, I believe it was a spokesperson in one of the government agencies, came out with, chest thumping, saying that we're so happy that we were able to detain these people that might have caused some discomfort for our external visitors who've come for the summit, and that is really the kind of tone that we are seeing from the executive, and very similar to Mozambique. The protests are going on now, the killings are going on now, and there hasn't been a voice of reason from the executive. First of all, taking responsibility for the excesses, and these excesses are very clear. The African Union has guidelines, the United Nations has guidelines for the policing of assemblies by law enforcement, also the use of less lethal weapons by law enforcement, and there are certain standards that must be met, and these standards are not being met in Mozambique since the protests began on October 24th through to, and presently still going on. The police have applied very violent means, and the resort to the use of this force is really contrary to their obligations. What's required of the authorities is to differentiate between peaceful protesters and those who engage in violence. And we do know that there have been instances where protesters have are alleged to have burnt down buildings. We saw that at the Lebombo port of entry exit between South Africa and Mozambique, and the temporary closure of that border post on the Mozambican side because of the setting alight of the buildings there. But isolated acts of violence do not render a protest non-peaceful. That's the point that the guidelines, especially from the African Union, give. And so the excesses that we are seeing are not being called out even by the police themselves, and that's a problem. And the next line, like I mentioned that the courts are really the last line of defense. The Constitutional Council of Mozambique has really dragged its feet in making the decision, and the decision that came out last week to call for a validation of the results, the election results, really just brings dissatisfaction to not just Podemos, Renamo, Pahuma as well, and just the citizens as a whole who are dissatisfied with governance in that country.
Sure.
So there's a complete of responsibilities and roles by different government agencies in the region to ensure that governance and democracy and human rights are protected.
Nixon, there is an expectation that a country like South Africa, champion for democracy, constitutionalism, all of those good things associated with strong electoral processes, transparency, accountability, that we would have been among the first to actually call out part of what is happening in Mozambique. But in fact, at least not on a public level, that has not been the case. How do you explain South Africa's reaction, lack thereof, to this situation in Mozambique?
Cathy, to understand South Africa's reaction, I always have to say that I'm a student of history before any other thing when I respond to this kind of questions. Look at the SADC geopolitical structure from the liberation movement up until where we are today, and look at the close relationship between these political entities within the various countries in SADC, and take back to their historical mission in the liberation struggle up until to date. Of course, there have been problems that happen that lead maybe to a position that South Africa is taking. One, you have to look at, even when we criticize the leadership, we also have to look at what transpired over the long time. I recall in 2000 up until I think 2012, when former President Joachim Chisono took over power, there was that gleam of hope of a Mozambique that is developing, that is taking care of its citizen, a new middle class emerging after the war ended. At the same time, in South Africa, you have President Thabo Mbeki also driving the economic changes that we saw, that is so to a growing middle class in this country. The question is, what happened after these two leaders left power? So we cannot just take a blanket approach to say, no, but things have been wrong in this situation. I'm trying to narrow this to the kind of leadership that emerges in this liberation movement going forward, that inform the citizens to feel where they are, that inform countries to take an approach which they are taking. For instance, my previous interlocutors talked about Tanzania and Botswana being a difference, but they have their own historical context which is comparatively different from what is happening in Mozambique, for example, from what happened in South Africa. And soon it will be the election in Namibia, for example. But we often forget that had it not been the Battle of the Quito Carnival happening and the defeat of the apartheid government at the time in that particular battle, which then pushed the apartheid government to retreat and allow Namibia to get independence, which is also paved the way, because they saw that if we are going to allow this country to be taken by the force of arms in a way it happened in Mozambique or in Zimbabwe, then we are likely to lose everything. That's how the negotiations started in this country. And that informs why perhaps South Africa's stars, they are being cautious, but they also see the problem. It does mean that the country is holding or folding arms. I believe that the Department of International Relations and Cooperation under Minister Ramola would be doing certain underground diplomatic work, which might not necessarily be pronounced on a radio, on a platform like this. But that we have to be extremely cautious and understand the context of the region at a broader sense in its historical journey for us to be able to explain what is happening currently.
That's fair enough, Nixon, because of course diplomatic channels between countries are always open, but in the SADC region we've paid a high price for this quiet diplomacy, as it's often described, when it comes to dealing with matters of this nature. And one wonders what the role then and the cost of a quiet diplomacy is. You've got the rest of the world very vocally condemning the violence that has been associated.
But don't forget there are several factors to that. For the case of Zimbabwe, for example, you had President Mbeki coming out that they wanted to use this country to overthrow the government in Zimbabwe. Order coming from London. The question is, who is behind what is happening in Mozambique? We don't know. And I mentioned Total.
But that's the question. That's the question I'm putting out to you.
I mentioned ExxonMobil to show you that we might be talking of what is happening, but the undercurrent that is happening, in my view, and I can be controversial about this, in my view, there is a deliberate approach to kick out liberation movement in Southern Africa. And owing to the geopolitical tension that is happening in the current world. The question that you see in Cabo Delgado there, it started with the Russians. They were there. But because there were mercenaries that were hired to kick the Russians out there, and the Russians had to move before before the Rwandan forces came in. These are things that we do not talk about. But you have to understand all these dynamics. For me, when I talk about this issue, I tend to reserve my comment to owing to factors that I understand from the geopolitical point of view in the region.
Mabatu? Yeah. I will say this. Given its complex nature, and I wouldn't simplify it just to say that there is like a deliberate attempt to move out, to outrule, so to speak, liberation movements, because someone insinuates that they have not been problematic. And in the same breath, we see what's happening in the DRC, we see what's happening in Sudan. Is it possible to have so many, you've got the UN Security Council's involvement there, you've got SADC's involvement there, but yet no peace has been restored? Why is that the case? So there are, and it goes back to the earlier question that you asked, Cathy, about the involvement of interest that's involved within these different nation states, and the degree to which states actually have sovereignty. I would argue to say that, for me, from a democratic perspective, if there is a lack of governance, if there is poor democracy, it is then easy, on the one hand, to say, sometimes you've got political parties, liberation movements that say democracy is not working, look at what is happening. And then in the same breath, you also have the argument that will say that, oh, there are intervening forces or other actors that are, third hands that are trying to influence this democratic process or the stability of what's happening within the country. I think that, to Nixon's point, an important question to ask is identify who are the stakeholders, what are the interests at hand, why are moves being made or not being made. With Mozambique, I'm going to go back to the previous point that this is not the first time that we are seeing instability within Mozambique. Why is there a limited impact and effect within with the previous interventions that have been made? Why are we at this point again with the provincial elections that took place not so long ago and there were disputes then? Why won't these fundamental issues actually addressed? I look forward to the time whereby election and violence are no longer synonymous in the African continent. I look forward to the day in which we can see regional bodies such as the AU, such as ECOWAS, such as SADC can really claim an authoritative voice within the continent. If so, that there are issues, which is true, there are issues of misinformation and disinformation that countries like China, countries like the USA, countries like Russia influence African countries during elections, even outside of electoral times. What does that say about the state of governance from a regional perspective? What does that say about the AU? What does that say about ECOWAS? What does that say about SADC? What needs to be changed within those regional bodies?
I want to bring in just some of the views from our listeners on the voice notes, and then we'll wrap it up with Ellen.
Good morning, Aus Cathy and the listeners of ACFM. Aus Cathy, it's so difficult for us to think that SADC can do something about Mozambique, especially when the leader of SADC is now Emerson Mnangagwa, the very same president who's doing the same thing each and every day in his country. So we can't expect much really from SADC to help the poor country there in Mozambique. Thanks.
Hi, Cathy. Good morning. How are you, Mafuta? Hey, Cathy. The problem in Mozambique is a general one that Africa faces of a double-edged sword, the colonial demon, Cathy, and also the mismanagement of our countries by the current regimes. Those are the problems. Nixon is very correct to say context is very important in most African conflicts or issues. But here, Cathy, I think the region has to act. I think Mozambique needs an African solution or a regional solution to the problem. Cabo Delgado, Cathy, is not a local conflict, but it's a foreign-inspired conflict, Cathy.
Good morning to your panelists. I'm Donald in Rustenburg. Thank you, Alan, for honoring the legacy of the late great human rights defender, Dewa Mavinga. I'm sure wherever he saw is smiling right now. Thanks for keeping the good work. They were started.
Absolutely, a very committed human rights defender Dewa Mavinga was, and we hosted him a number of times on this platform. So, Alan, let me then come to you, because you heard what Nixon's retort to me was, right? I said there was global outrage, and he says we have to ask ourselves, why there was global outrage. For an organization involved with human rights like yourself, how do you tell the forest for the trees?
Sure. First of all, I really agree with your with the listeners that sent the voice notes, and really, this is an issue that many analysts on the continent try to shy away from, and I really encourage us to have these conversations around economic interests, really because they are at the heart of the problem. When one of the listeners talked about the demon of colonialism, the interests of external parties, and how Cabo Delgado is a theater of that. First of all, to mention that Southern Africa has always been seen as a bastion of democracy and human rights in comparison to other parts of the continent, East, Central, and West Africa particularly. But we are now seeing an undoing of this, because the real needs of African people is economic justice, and the battleground is on the economic resources, the mineral resources that are on the continent. We were able to work on political independence, right from independence from colonial powers, but we are yet to grapple with economic justice. And when we have foreign actors in the continent exploiting resources at the expense of Africans, and with the complicity then of government and government agencies, there is a problem, and it will not end, and this is why the protests will continue. And I think it is right for Africans to stand up and say enough is enough. And when you push government to take up their rightful responsibilities, you shouldn't be met with excessive force. And accountability is really important. So my parting shots is that concerned government should really press not just the Mozambican authorities, but those other interested foreign elements that are operating on the continent, including those in the continent operating in other countries in the continent for their own economic interests. Those are the conversations that I think we need to have.
Thank you so much for that contribution, Alan Ngari. He is Advocacy Director at Human Rights Watch. Dr. Mabato Mungaye is a data analyst at Good Governance Africa. Nixon, you're watching the clock now. You see we've got 15 seconds.
Yeah, I think we need to look at Mozambique like in any other case of the African continent, that the conflict rests with the leadership, poor leadership, but also foreign interest evolving in self-indication of Mozambique. There is no other way I can put it other than that.
Nixon Katembu is executive producer with our Kiswahili desk at Channel Africa. All right, lots of food for thought then on the situation in Mozambique. It's 11 o'clock, time for your latest news update.
Thank you, Cathy. Top stories at 11. A new standard draft bylaw for township economies introduced, and bus operations resumes in the city of Tshwane. For SAFM News, I'm Ondelambana, and a very good morning. The Cooperative Governance Minister Velenkosini Hlabisa has introduced a new standard draft bylaw for township economies. According to his department, this bylaw aims to create an enabling environment for small businesses in townships, support economic inclusion, job creation and community empowerment. Hlabisa said that the bylaw is not just to regulate tuck shops, but that it will also ensure that people who run businesses in the townships do so legally.
To run any kind of business, you will need a permit from the municipality. To get a permit from the municipality, you must be a registered person and you must be a South African. If you are not a South African, you must be a documented foreign national. If you are not documented, you can't run a business. Because if you will not regulate such, you will never know who is selling what, and when food poisoning is happening, you won't be able to trace who was responsible. Every business is going to be registered.
2 children aged 10 and 11 years old have drowned in a trench in Tabong, Valgom in the Free State province. The Department of Water and Sanitation says a group of children, among them the deceased, were attempting to swim inside a trench that was full of water as a result of rainfall from the weekend. According to the Val Central Water Board, a subdivision in the department, the community members were alerted by one of the children about the drowning. Board spokesperson Lindiwe Mguni says despite swift action, paramedics were unable to resuscitate the children. KwaZulu-Natal MEC for Transport, Siboniso Duma, is expected to meet with leaders of the All Truck Drivers Forum in Allied South Africa, whose members are striking today. The organization, which represents the interest of truck drivers, has for years raised concerns over the hiring of foreign nationals in the freight and logistics industry. They're also unhappy around some employers who are not adhering to the minimum wage policy. Transport Department spokesperson Ndabezinhle Sibiya elaborates.
We wish to indicate that yesterday the MEC had an informal meeting with the leadership of All Truck Drivers Forum and Allied SA, and the MEC has indicated that he is of the view that no issue is above the collective wisdom. A formal meeting is therefore being planned with ATDF SA to discuss issues of mutual interest. The meeting has been coordinated by the head of department, Sponsompele. Importantly, the MEC has indicated that he's aware that letters that have been raised by truck drivers are managed by national government as they relate to employment of foreign truck drivers.
The city of Tshwane says its buses resumed operations this morning. Operations were interrupted last week following a protest by 33 bus drivers who have been dismissed for taking part in an unprotected strike in May. The decision to fire them was taken after they appeared before a disciplinary hearing last month. City of Tshwane spokesperson Lindela Mashego.
This morning, Monday the 11th November 2024, 128 drivers reported for duty to honor their shifts. This effectively means that the 160 bus routes, which are normally serviced on weekdays, will have 32 less buses today and the days to come, as the city is still in the process of replacing the dismissed drivers. The shortage will see some of the routes either experiencing delays in the scheduled times or fewer buses, as some of the on-duty drivers will be diverted to the high-volume areas.
Leaders of Arab and Muslim states are gathering for an emergency summit in Saudi Arabia to discuss the conflicts in Gaza and Lebanon. The BBC's Frank Gardner has the details.
Exactly 1 year has passed since the last emergency Arab-Islamic summit was held here. Since then, despite urgent calls for a ceasefire in Gaza, there's been no let-up in the conflict, and Israel has taken its fight beyond Hamas to Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iran. Overshadowing this conference are two things: Iran's next move and the election of Donald Trump for a second term. He's popular with the Saudis, but he's also a firm supporter of Israel and hawkish when it comes to Iran. The Islamic Republic has vowed to hit back at Israel for its missile attack of 2 weeks ago.
Recapping the top story, the Cooperative Governance Minister Velenkosini Hlabisa has introduced a new standard draft bylaw for township economies. I am Ondelambana for SAFM News headlines at 11:30.
If you think you cannot afford a lawyer, think again. Clientele Legal has made professional legal services affordable for you. Whether it's a civil, criminal, or labor-related matter, we have a nationwide panel of attorneys standing by to assist you. SMS SAFM to 32195. That's SAFM to 32195 and we'll call you back. Clientele General is a licensed non-life insurer and an authorized FSP. Standard rates and terms and conditions apply.
Our role must be to seek to build a better world.
SAFM invites you to our annual public lecture, delivered by former Minister Dr. Naledi Pandor. The theme for the lecture is 30 Years of South African Freedom. Reimagining South Africa's democracy, achievements, challenges, and the road ahead in protecting our democratic gains. The lecture will take place on the 21st of November 2024 at the Birchwood Hotel and Conference Center. Secure your seat by emailing us at info@safm.co.za.
Today, I'm part of seeking to build a better South Africa.
SAFM, leading the conversations that move us.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
Welcome to The Talking Point, the final hour of the show, leading the conversations that move us. I'm Cathy Mohlahlana, and of course we'll be with you until midday. We will end off the show with the award-winning book reading, as we do every single day. For our final conversation this morning, we are going to turn our attention to the latest campaign coming out of the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa. It wants to raise awareness around illicit goods and also highlight the importance of buying legitimate products, especially in the wave of, in the midst of all of the contaminated food and food poisoning incidents that we've reported on in the country. Cheka Dai Deng Reka Makoya is the campaign. Neo Momodu is Executive Legal Regulatory Affairs and Stakeholder Engagement and joins us on the line. Neo, good morning.
Good morning, Cathy, and good morning to your listeners. And thanks for having us this morning.
The Consumer Goods Council should have been ahead of this conversation. The fact that we're having this interview now, talking about this campaign now, it does feel like a bit of a reaction.
Well, the SAFM should have actually been on the ball as well, because we have been in this space for the last 2 months. This campaign was conceptualized about 3 months ago, and it was not because of the deaths and the unfortunate incidents that are occurring right now. It's something that we do on an ongoing basis. So we are an industry association of about 9,000 members in the FMCG sector, retailers, manufacturers, and the entire value chain. And a lot of our members are not just the big retailers, but SMMEs. The work that we do on a daily basis is to educate on food safety, food security, food quality, and that's it's something that we've been doing on an ongoing basis. This campaign comes at a heightened stage where, like I said, we planned it about 3 months ago, and we were chasing here, the festive season, just to ensure that people are aware, they know what is happening, and unfortunately, events did run ahead of us. But even with that, Cathy, we have been in the communication space, like I said, for the last 2 months or so.
The reality is that members of our communities have been complaining about the deteriorating quality of foods for a long time now. In fact, we have had multiple conversations around South African consumers who were raising awareness about counterfeit products that were being produced. So if you take your loved South African brands, how they were finding replicas of these products in local townships, but something about how they were packaged was raising alarm, because it may have said Coke on the can or Coke on the bottle, but there were just slight deviations that pointed to them that this good is in fact a counterfeit good. And I guess that's the point that I'm trying to raise with you, that the issue around the proliferation of illicit consumer products within our communities has been increasing for some time. It's been allowed to increase unabated. But now that we've seen people dying from it, of course, it's sparked different types of campaigns. But where has the Consumer Council been in that conversation, including of these counterfeit products?
Kathy, like I said to you, this is something that we do on an ongoing basis, right? So I suppose what has brought this to light even more, glaringly is the fact that, unfortunately, people have died. And it is precisely now because most stakeholders that were working in silos individually are clubbing together to say that in order to make an impact, let's work together. For example, now we have the backing of the government communications and information system that are saying to us, we will be actually talking about your campaign in our key messages. You also talk about our campaign. So we have been in the space. And Kathy, I think, without belaboring the point, we are here now. Like I said, we've been there before. We are launching a campaign today called Cheka Daideng Reka Makoya. Cheka meaning check this thing, in Afrikaans Daideng Reka Makoya, buy the real thing. And our campaign goes as far as educating the public about what to look out for, so that you're able to differentiate between real goods and fake goods. I'm using those because when you say illicit or counterfeit, sometimes people don't understand what you're talking about. And we're looking at what is it that you should be looking at in the product and how to report it. We've had this 0800 014 856 number for the longest time, and yes, it's an opportunity for us now to really put it out there in the public. And on top of that, we are launching an app which should be able and will be able to help consumers and users the opportunity to identify products, whether or not they're real, and where there's a suspicion of the product, they're able again to just report on the 0800 014 856 number. And we're working very closely. In the last 3-4 months, we've been training law enforcement officers to use this app so that themselves, when they go and raid premises where the suspicion of illicit, they're able to use the app. And we've had very positive feedback. So we've been in the background, also in the forefront, actually making sure that we go into communities and actually educating them. You're hearing about it now simply because we issued this alert to say that we will be actually now going formally with this campaign of Cheka Daideng Reka Makoya.
Let's talk about the work which you say you have been doing. What has that work entailed?
It entails us speaking to our members. Like I said to you, a number of our members happen to be SMMEs and the big retailers that you have. So we go and train our SMMEs about how do you register a product, right? There are standards, GS1 standards, that are verified standards where the barcode is issued at a global level, and each country has got its own prefix. So South Africa will have 600. Another country, the US, I know when you look at a Coca-Cola bottle as an example, will have 400. We're teaching them to say that if you want to be out there in the space and you have a tracking and tracing system, a product that is authenticated, these are the barcodes that you should be subscribing to, called the GS1 barcodes. So it's about that, registering your product, making sure that it's safe. Secondly, it's about how do you actually, from a food safety perspective, what do you do? The premises that you have, legally produce products, and actually teaching them about how to run a business. And by and large, most of the time, ensuring that the smallest of the SMMEs, whether you're an acha producer, actually you find your product actually goes into retail and makes it on shelf, to the shelf. And we also have relationships with, informal traders where we work through the likes of Santaco and other stakeholders where we're saying, even in taxi ranks, how do we train informal traders on issues of food safety, issues of food quality? How do you register your products? How do you keep things, they'll sell by dates, expiry dates? How do you make sure that you actually sell products that are not harmful to the public? So that is the type of work that we do from a food security and food safety perspective.
So based on all of this engagement and work you've been doing, how then would you explain this high proliferation of goods that don't have barcodes, products that don't have sort of very clear ingredient lists on them for a consumer to be able to look at and see what it is exactly that they are consuming. Where do these goods come from?
Cathy, I suppose that's a question that you actually have to ask law enforcement. It's a question that you have to ask customs. It's a question that you have to ask, government specifically. So crime is rampant in our country, whether it's being all sorts of crime, and now illicit is a loophole that people are seeing because there has not been enforcement. And that's where the challenge is. There has not been enforcement in South Africa. People have been able to get away with selling these things. Now everybody's up in arms. I heard in your news bulletin that we're talking about a bill now that looks at township economies, and part of what they're looking for is, the regulation of the informal or spaza shops. It's time that we do that. Where there is no regulation and where there is no enforcement, people are gonna do as they please. So I'm hoping that this campaign, the efforts from government, the efforts from what the municipalities are saying, that you cannot trade without a permit, you cannot trade if you're not registered, are going to begin to actually eliminate and hopefully eradicate this practice. But you need to actually have consequences, because if you don't have consequences and you don't lead by example, people do not feel discouraged to do this. And also as well, even in our own communities, we understand that sometimes people will go for those products because they look at price, they look at convenience, it's just down the road from me, and sure, nobody has died in our communities. It is about us as consumers as well, taking the responsibility, knowing that, you may buy a pill for R5, but that pill may send you to the emergency ward. We need to have our own standards in terms of what it is that we consume, what to look out for, and actually report, where incidents where we find that people may be breaking the law, or where we actually, through the app, we find that there is a possibility that the product may be illicit.
So one of the insights that I was hoping you would be able to share with us, because of the engagement that you've been having with these SMMEs, naturally, if you're pointing them to the right barcodes and products that they should be using and should be sourcing, you also then are having conversations with them about where they're sourcing their current products and to what extent the proliferation again of these goods affects even the SMEs that are part of the network of businesses that you do work with.
So Cathy, we do work very closely, like I said earlier on, with law enforcement officers, right? So when there is an incident or incidents where we suspect or we get a whiff, because our helpline, even more than ever, has become so busy. Ours is to get the information. We alert law enforcement officers. We are not a regulator, and I think that's where I need to make things very clear. We're an industry association that is formed by our members, for our members, in the interest of ensuring that when it comes to their products are safe to consume, they are legal. And because we help our members trade better, they are enabled to actually ensure that consumers as well are serviced better. So when we do get that information, we share it with enforcement officers. But show me somebody who's been arrested and prosecuted for actually selling, so where that ends up in the value chain, I think it's a loophole that we need to close. And I think government now is starting to realize that to close that loophole, you actually have need to have regulations, because you can't enforce that does not exist, right? So when you do have regulations, hopefully they'll have fines, imprisonment, and all sorts of things that come with, things that can actually stop people from doing this.
There was a time when it comes to illicit goods that it was almost easy for people to point it out. Like I said, you would have goods that don't have barcodes and all sorts of other things that point to the fact that this is a questionable product. What you have today is that some of these syndicates have become so good at reproducing products with branding that looks almost 100% to what the original brand of products that South Africans love are. And of course, it requires consumers to pay that much more attention. From a Goods Council, again, engaging and interacting with your members, what are the insights that they have given you around this issue of the counterfeit goods? What do you know about the problem? What can you share with us about it?
Well, Cathy, illicit is the art, or it's I'll call it an art because it really is an art now, because it's so rife that it's actually led to death. Counterfeit is another one that we'll find. So it's illicit and counterfeit. Counterfeit is you're producing a product and you're selling it off as though it's the original product. So some of the things that we're seeing is that, what we can do is to say, consumers, be aware, look at the spelling, look at the labeling, look at whether or not a product has been filled to capacity, because there are telltale signs. Look at the color. So people, they check the color ever slightly. It's mixing of the words and then using a brand, the swoosh of a Nike, for example, but then it won't say Nike, will say Nike or something like that. And if you're not vigilant as a consumer, you will miss these things. So we need to actually, again, as a public, take that much care, educate even our children at home to say, this is what you look out for. But more importantly, I'm not saying do not support the small SMMEs or the spaza shops. You need to look at the environment that you're buying from, right? So when you go to a store and it's filled from the door to everything is mixed together, there is no order, the likelihood is that the food have got no order either. And that's why, Cathy, one of the reasons that we found that causes some of the unfortunate fatalities has got to do with the fact that it may have been pesticides. It may have been a trader who wanted to kill rodents and so all sorts of things, and then they spray these things, and then it contaminates the food. So it's about, yes, they change the labelings ever so slightly. The colors are the same, but, the way they write the words, it's not filled to capacity. The barcode is not there. It's those type of things that we have to look out, and the expiry dates and such things.
Let me bring in the view of some of our listeners and their questions on this issue.
Hi, Cathy. This is Daniel Joshua Tellen. Hearing to your guest, they say they're educating people and telling them about counterfeit goods and the products and so forth. But the problem is educating and people and ensuring that these things are implemented. Is there anything done to check to see whether these people are implementing that which they are trained and taught? Is there anything done to check whether there's fraud and corruption in the circle that's going on? Because this is what it is. Educating and notifying people is one thing, but implementing and ensuring that what you educate them is carrying out, that is not being done. So what are they doing about ensuring that what they're teaching them is carried out? Thank you, and God bless you.
Hi, Cathy and South Africans and your team as well. It's Eddie from Ordinary Stress. Cathy, now that the minister has pronounced the bylaw relating to township economy, I think it would be better that those with no permits, they must be closed down immediately. And there must be a notice that goes out that if you don't have a permit, you get operating, you'll be arrested. And a sentence should be pronounced. What will be the sentence for that? Close them down, those who don't have permits. Look at those who have permits but they don't do the right thing. I think that should be the good start about all those things. We must apologize to all families who lost their loved ones. It was not supposed to be.
All right.
Thank
you for those voice notes. Now, let me give you a chance to respond before I bring in more of our callers.
Thank you, Cathy. And, just the sentiments that are shared by Eddie to say, really deep condolences to the families that have, experienced these fatalities. And really, it's something that all of us should have done better from the beginning. It's never too late to start, I hope. One death is one death too many. We are getting on this with much rigor, than we've ever done before. But like I said previously, and the point Eddie is making is a very important one. If you do not have regulations, if you do not have laws, then you've got nowhere and no way of holding people accountable, hoping that the new bylaws are actually going to make a difference in terms of how enforcement actually happens. I said earlier on, and now what Daniel was raising, do we go back to ensure that there's implementation? Yes, when it comes to our members, there are standards that they have to sign up to become members of the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa. There's a code of good practice. There's a code that tells you exactly what and when you are found that you are not abiding by that code, firstly, there are, internal mechanisms of how we deal with those ones. And secondly, we report to law enforcement. And whether law enforcement enforces at the end of the day is something that still needs to be seen. So from an implementation point of view, like I said, we are not a regulator, we're not an implementer. We're an industry association that educates, that informs, that collaborates with relevant government departments. And once that which is wrong has been reported, like any crime, because let's be precise about this. This is a crime. Then law enforcement has got to take its course. So we need to close the whole value chain. We need to close all the loops and make sure that each system, everybody in the system, plays their part and make sure that those that do not comply suffer the consequences.
So when it comes to your members, can you with confidence unequivocally say that those people whose businesses form part of your membership base, that they are all compliant?
Cathy, we would know if it's our members, right? So can I say with confidence, and I'd love to say so because we do have a code of conduct, right? We have not had any incidents reported from any of our members. And because we haven't had those incidents, or even on our help on that reporting line, we haven't had any of our members being implicated in any way with any of such acts of illicit and counterfeit. Yes, I'll say that, with that information not coming forth, we are confident that our members are compliant.
And I guess part of my question embedded in it is, how closely do you watch your members? Yes, there's a code of conduct. Yes, there are standards that are set, but to what extent do you actually physically make sure that what they are reporting is what they're actually doing?
So, Cathy, you have the consumer regulator, right? That actually has the powers to go and inspect and enforce and make sure that there are those inspections happening all the time. So in the formal setting, we have regulations that you've got the Agricultural Product Standard Act as an example, right? That looks at regulating products that are in there. So you have inspectors, government inspectors that actually do go in, and we have not found our members to be wanting. Once in a while, there'll be a recall of a product because something happened in the value chain. And when that happens, our members act very quickly, and because there are barcodes that are able to say which batch at what stores we're able to pull it. You remember the listeriosis example. I'm just putting it out there, that we have systems where we're able to really urgently call products that we think may not be compliant. But as far as it's not something that is rife, that we have within our membership, and there are those checks and balances that we're working together with the ombuds.
No, you'll continue in a moment. You'll continue shortly. It's time for the latest headlines.
Thank you, Cathy. News headlines at 11:30. Over 1,200 cargo trucks have been processed at the Lebombo port of entry with Mozambique since yesterday. The border was reopened on Friday afternoon after it had been closed for days following violent protests in Maputo and other cities in that country. The Cooperative Governance Minister Velenkosini Hlabisa has introduced a new standard draft bylaw for township economies, and a BBC World Service investigation has seen evidence that devastating floodwater in South Sudan is spreading pollution from the oil industry. A full update follows at the top of the hour.
EFC 119 is live this Thursday with a stellar main event featuring interim champion Terence the Black Panther Balelo and Edson the Trapdoor Spider Machavani vying for the genuine 24-carat flyweight title, whilst the co-main event will usher in a new era. South Africa's Dana Van Wyk and Nigeria's Juliet Chukwu battle it out for the 135-pound golden buckle. EFC 119 from the World Sports Betting Arena. Watch it on SABC Sport Channel on DTT Channel 4 from 7 p.m. Brought to you by SABC Sport.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue the conversation on The Talking Point. Our guest is Neo Momodu, Executive Legal, Regulatory Affairs and Stakeholder Engagement at the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa. She's here to talk about their campaign, Cheka Dai Deng, Reka Magoya. It's their new campaign encouraging South Africans to be aware of counterfeit, illicit goods and products currently making their way into South African homes, into shops, and they want all of us to be aware of what the telltale signs are and what we must be looking out for. Zamo, you are calling us from Durban. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy. How are you?
Good.
Happy to you. Thank you so much. Nice talking to you once again. Cathy, my concern here is that, like I said, that your guest there, she didn't answer properly when you had told her that she feel that they are being reactive rather than being proactive. I feel that as South Africans, our government has failed us, has failed our kids. I remember in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, when there was looting, the government, South Africans were prepared to die for just one old man who was just going to be jailed. But for 23 kids have died. All South Africans were just casual about it. We're just casual about this topic. Our kids dying because of illicit food that is in the market. It is saddening. It is saddening. I remember the times when we were growing up. That time there was this slogan that said, an injury to one is an injury to all. Imagine those families who had lost their kids, what's happening to them. And the government is just like casual, absolutely casual about the whole thing. And it means that like we got freedoms, Black South Africans got freedom for all these illegal foreigners to come and do as they please in our country. It is saddening that our government is not doing anything. Thank you so much, Cathy.
All right, Zamo's view there. Now, before I bring Sia in, much of the conversation around these illicit goods has been centered on shops that are run by non-nationals in this country. You spoke about listeriosis, and that by and large was, contamination coming out of South African products found in, retailers, South African retailers. So this narrative that almost seeks to position the challenges as being limited to shops run by non-nationals. Speak to me about that.
Cathy, without checking people's passports and permits, I really cannot say whether they are South African or not, right? What I can say there is that, we as the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa, we have members who run establishments that are legal, right? They have permits and they comply with all the laws of this country. they have barcodes that are issued by GS1. And maybe let me take time now to explain what GS1 is. GS1 is a global organization that manages global identification systems for items based on unique numbering, right? South Africa, the numberings are obtained and they have prefixes ranging from 0 to 9. South African prefixes will be 600. But like I said earlier on, there will be others that will be 500, 400. And as long as they're GS1 products, we know that they are products that can be traced in 118 countries. There's millions and millions of products that have these GS1 products, and they speak to one another, whether it's sold in South Africa, whether it's sold in China, whether it's sold to Nigeria. If it has a GS1 barcode, then we know that it's a barcode that is authenticated, and it is, it's acceptable in the value chain. So our members, I can only speak for our members to say that, whether you go to any one of the big retailers or some of our SMMEs, these are registered, legitimate companies that actually government regulates on an ongoing basis from a safety standards and quality standards on a regular basis. Like I said before the break, inspectors go into our products and we find, and we are, we can say with confidence that they actually do follow the law.
Let me bring in Sia in Durban. Good morning, Sia.
Yes, good morning, Cathy. Thank you for having the subject this morning, which of course is affecting everybody in the country. Cathy, it is very, very concerning that our government is so slack in terms of how they do things. It's like they are reactional. They can't anticipate problems. They can't see things before they happen. We have to have children dying. I mean, we haven't even heard the president, I don't know, maybe it's me, I haven't even heard the president talking about the matter, condemning what is going on. So that really questions loyalty. Loyalty as to where is the loyalty of this government lie, really? Is it South Africans good when it's time for them, then the canvassing for the votes, and so on and so forth? Because you'll see 2026 is coming around, they'll be all over the show trying to canvass and dealing with these issues. That's not how you govern. That's not how you govern. You've got to anticipate, you have to deal with and nip the things in the bud before they become a crisis. It's like we have a government that governs by crisis after crisis. Now, I want to mention that if as a country we're really going to make headway, we need to deal with things before from the border, right from the border, the gateways into the country. If we can't control things and we still have illegality and people running around in our country who are legal, what do you expect? If you are not legal, you already have broken the law, and then you're going to be selling food. Do you think that person is loyal to the laws of the country? I mean, it's just logic, simple logic. And we can't be compromising and be nicey about it. We have to speak the truth, spade a spade. If the illegality in the country is allowed to thrive, what do you expect? The result is the death of children. And someone has to be held to account to it. It can't just be business as usual. It just cannot. And we request that the media really play a vital role in calling these politicians to account. Not when it's time for them to come and canvass for the votes. We need to hear from them now. They should be up and down in the studios. We want questions answered. How is this allowed to continue to happen?
All right, Sia, thanks for that contribution. Amos, you're in the Lekwa municipality. Good morning.
Miss, hello, Cathy. Thank you so much for an opportunity. I'll be very quick on this one. I can hear Mr. Velenko.
Hello, Amos.
Part of GMP, of which is
Amos. Just watch out for your line there. The line is not great. I'm going to ask you to repeat what you said because we lost you.
Okay, thanks, Cathy. I'm saying I heard Mr. Hlabisa about the new standards, bylaws, and so on that they're going to maybe start working on. But I wish they can also consider awarenesses workshops, especially in our SMEs, people who South Africans who are doing business in food industry, to surely have more information in terms of food safety and good manufacturing practices and hygiene. Because I noticed, I'm a small business in Lekwa. I was doing the food processing. Then now and then I go and attend free trainings at the CEDA branch in Secunda, where you also get information how important is food manufacturing and all the standards, all the practices that makes your food very legit. Because you can imagine buying a packet of food and you find a piece of a necklace on it or something. So I really wish if they start with those standards, bylaws, and so on, they have to actually surface a lot of information in terms of food and safety and hygiene in our community, in our society.
So Amos, do you feel that this is something that generally entrepreneurs, business owners are not that invested in?
It's not, Cathy. It's not, because someone will just easily start a Amakwinya shop and all, and then fly with it because people are buying it. Definitely, that person will never see a necessity to get information in terms of food safety. Then go and see the place where they manufacture those Amakwinya. I don't think you will go back again. So that's when we will definitely need that. We need our local economic development officials. I don't see them on the ground in terms of having awarenesses, having the information enough, like trainings, workshops, and so on and so on. Then that will strengthen our business, so that even ourselves as South Africans, we still need to take the business in any kind of business, and it's very crucial when it comes to food. Food is very sensitive, and we need information. We need to be lectured. We need to get more information about it. Then, even ourselves, we have to clean our room first before we can. Definitely, the enforcement will have to deal with the issues on the patterns and so on. But even within ourselves as South Africans, small businesses, as small as even if you are selling a guinya for R1, you definitely need these awareness workshops.
Okay.
In food safety, thanks so much, Cathy. I appreciate your call. I'm always listening to your call, your show. Thank you so much. It's very, I love it. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Amos.
Good morning, Sis Cathy and SFM listeners. I think the commission itself is limited in terms of the scope that they are playing around. And I think for me, what I've always seen is I think they are somehow always responding to things that are out there in the public. But if we were to dive deep into a number of sectors, like I can tell you now, if they were to go into, the shipping sector, they would realize that if they had played a critical role, they would be saving a lot of, local businesses, especially in opportunities that are South Africa bound, but they are not present. So I don't know how, their active participation is determined.
Hi, Cathy. It's Mpoye from Fiera. Listen, I'm hearing your guest talking about all the things that she's talking about, but I really don't think she has done her research regarding to these products. There are new products that comes into market which are normally not counterfeit, but new products. So how do we differentiate between new products and illicit products? Because there might be confusion right there. Thank you.
All right. Now, let me give you a chance then to respond to our listeners.
Thank you very much. I think a lot of them were comments about what government should be doing. The fact that, there's it's reactiveness rather than proactiveness. I think it's something that, now we're seeing bylaws are going to come into being and hopefully we'll work together. But when Amos talked about, because you can tell he's an experienced person there, the training that is happening from a food handling, absolutely. And that's the work at the beginning of our conversation when you were asking what is it that we do as the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa. We do that training on an ongoing basis with our members specifically, especially those that register as new. And then we refresh on an ongoing basis, quarterly, every 6 months, annually, we make sure that our members are actually trained to do this. What I see an opportunity existing is, when these bylaws do come into being, to work together with the likes of government to say, how do we help capacitate from a training perspective the materials that we have as a consumer group? How do we share them it wide outside of the network of the 9,000 member organizations that we have? Because 9,000 is not a lot. We have millions of South Africans. We have shops all over, our townships, our urban areas, our rural areas, and I think it's important that we identify those opportunities where we can work together with these training initiatives to make sure that the message and the skills is transferred throughout the country, particularly where there are problem areas.
Okay.
And the GS1 standards, Mpho mentioned something very important, to say it starts all the way from the customs. What comes into our country? Are we aware? Do we actually have a spotlight on this? And we've spoken to the likes of SARS, we've spoken to the likes of the Department of Home Affairs to say that, the GS1 standards is the home affairs of products. It's like you as an individual, you have your ID number, you have your passport. Anytime you go anywhere in the world, you use your passport. It has all the information that is needed, that talks to who you are, where you come from, where you've been. And
All
the
right.
GS1 standards are able to do that with any product. So why doesn't government, as an example, adopt GS1 standards so that they're able to speak that language? Because, like I said, it's 118 countries
Now,
that are subscribed to this.
we're
Hello?
going to have to leave it there. We're completely out of time for the conversation. Thank you for coming on to the show. Neo Momodu is with the Consumer Goods Council. That's where I leave it today. Up next, the book reading.
This broadcast was brought to you by Hollywood Bets. Live in the moment.
The book reading. Please note that the views expressed in this book are not that of the station. Listeners' discretion is advised. SAFM presents another episode of A Life of Purpose, written by Luvuyo Wachela and Lumkile Wiseman Kuhlu. The reader is Lerato Velase.
The Ethics Institute had started in 2000 as a non-profit, non-governmental organization that operated concurrently as an independent public benefit institute and as a social enterprise. By 2010, when Wiseman joined the board, it had broadened its activities to provide training and services to other countries in Africa, the Middle East, Europe, the UK, and North America. Wiseman felt the Institute objectives were aligned with his own commitment to promote ethical conduct in various organizations, particularly large listed companies. Its international reach made sense to him in the light of his service on international boards in this phase of his professional journey. He served on the board from 2010 to 2015. The Ethics Institute mandate also covered a wide field of issues relating to individual and collective human actions, with a primary focus on organizational ethics, especially business ethics. The fact that it also operated in a number of African countries where it shared ethics resources and strove to build capacity resonated strongly with Wiseman's earlier work at NEPAD. He was also satisfied that a major focus of the Ethics Institute was on evaluating how organizations in the private and public sectors manage their internal ethics. The Institute of Directors. Wiseman was a founding trustee of the Institute of Directors, IOD, Chartered Director Governing Body. The appointment was a logical outcome of his involvement in the Ethics Institute and his professional experience regionally and internationally. The Chartered Director SA was created by the IOD to professionalize directorship as a distinct and respected career path in order to promote ethical practices. It was established as a further response to weaknesses in the governance of companies which had been exposed by the global financial crisis. In the light of public concern about the failure of boards of directors and to protect the public from risks that banks and other financial institutions had accumulated in the years leading to the crisis in 2008, it was felt that there was a need to improve the accountability and competence of boards. In this context, the IOD decided to introduce competence requirements for those wishing to qualify for appointment as directors. Aspirant directors must meet certain standards set and tested by the IOD. Wiseman's interest in promoting good governance in organizations and ethics and public accountability in the auditing and accounting profession was already widely known and respected. The role provided him with another platform to contribute to the enhancement of corporate governance in South Africa. Courage and Contention, 2014 to 2023. Wiseman's sphere of influence continued to expand in the second decade of the 21st century. While serving on the boards of the Ethics Institute and the IOD, he took the bold decision to document his life story. The concept was first mooted as early as 2008, when it was proposed that the life experiences of eminent alumni of the University of Fort Hare, UFH, be officially recorded. Wiseman's long history with the UHF began when he was a student in the late 1960s and early 1970s, and culminated in the recognition by the university of his unique contribution to the accounting profession when he was appointed patron of the Abasa Nkuhlu Subvention Fund of the School of Accounting and later awarded an honorary DCOM. A Life of Purpose. The first iteration of this biography, A Life of Purpose, was published in 2014, initially with 12 chapters, culminating in his role in the South African presidency and at the NAPAD in 2005. Wiseman deliberated on how to use the book as a tool for doing what he has always done, growing the pool of and empowering black accountants and advocating for the highest standards of ethics, values, and principles in governance structures in the auditing and accounting professions. During the launches of the 2014 edition, it became evident that many readers were moved by Wiseman's resilience and the determination that had enabled him to build on his modest beginnings, overcome obstacles and adversity, and realize the role he was destined to play in the world. The inspirational example of a vocation that had at its heart the social role of the auditing and accounting profession not only made for compelling reading, it provoked questions and discussions about the imperative to forge a culture of transparency, accountability, and public interest in the profession and more broadly in the business world. The Wiseman Nkuhlu Trust. Wiseman established a trust with the intention of using the proceeds from the sale of the book to support young accountants and generally advance the profession. According to one of the trustees, KPMG SA CEO Ignatius Sihole, when he set up the trust, Prof selflessly decided the proceeds would go into the trust for the development of the profession, which I think was very noble. Generally, when people write books, it is about creating a legacy for their families, for their children. Prof is doing it for the profession, which is why I was encouraged to volunteer to be a trustee, and I continue to serve on the trust. Wiseman's contribution to South Africa has continued under the auspices of the trust. In parallel, his abiding dedication to his family has reached new levels. His advocacy and thought leadership on the matters about which he is passionate continues to expand in new ways. Courageous Conversations. The Courageous Conversations Dialogue Series, a collaborative venture between the Wiseman Nkuhlu Trust and SAICA, was one of the initiatives of the Trust in line with Wiseman's mission to engage actively in challenging the profession to respond faithfully to public concerns. The confidence in his leadership shown by the profession nominating him to serve as Africa's trustee on the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation obliged him to play a leadership role in restoring public confidence in the profession. He used the trust as a platform from which to tackle public criticism of the profession and to encourage transparency and responsiveness. Freeman Nomvalo, a trustee of the trust, was involved in conceptualizing the Courageous Conversation initiative before he became SAICA CEO in 2019. He says of the initiative, "Courageous Conversations helped us to have the uncomfortable conversations in the profession and to face some of the questions we may not want to. Every profession, as it evolves, adopts a certain culture and view of itself, which is not necessarily unjustified, but which tends to be different to the public's view of the profession. Courageous Conversations was a bridge to bring these two perspectives into a conversation that would hopefully help the profession to at least to begin to appreciate the perspective of those that are not necessarily close to the profession." When Nomvalo became SAICA's CEO, a governance review task team headed by General Roy Anderson had been created in response to recommendations that SAICA change its governance structure. The recommendations were approved by the SAICA membership in October 2019, and a new board was established at a special general meeting with Deputy Auditor General Tsakani Maluleke as its chair. The Unite for Mzansi initiative, which emanated from the Courageous Conversations series, was also jointly facilitated by the Wiseman Nkuhlu Trust and SAICA in response to the findings of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture, corruption and fraud in the public sector, including organs of state, the Zondo Commission. Its intention was to challenge the whole business sector on issues of integrity, fighting corruption, unmasking and deconstructing the drive to maximize self-interest and advocating for public accountability. SAICA also commissioned a book, Anatomy of State Capture, through Stellenbosch University, in a further attempt by the accounting profession to mobilize society to play a positive role in dealing with the alarming revelations contained in the Zondo Commission report.
That was another episode of A Life of Purpose, second edition, written by Luvuyo Wochela and Lumkile Wiseman Kuhlu. The book is available online on www.kmmr.co.za, KMMR Publishers, and in all leading bookstores countrywide. It is broadcast on SAFM at 11:45 Monday to Thursday on The Talking Point. It is produced for the station by Vovi Patala, read by Lerato Mvelase, technical production Wiseman Manqele and Nanda Khoza.
It's 12 o'clock on Monday, the 11th of October, 2024. Very warm welcome to Updated Noon here on SAFM. Leading the conversation, I'm Sakina Kamwendo. Coming up in the next hour,
people who are defaulting on their maintenance orders will be placed on credit bureau.
Well, not paying your child maintenance could prevent you from getting credit. And close to 30 people are set to appear before the Bloemfontein